The night my parents handed my brother everything, the chandelier above the dining table hummed softly, like it knew something I didn't. I remember thinking that sound was strange, a low electrical buzz barely there. Or maybe it was just the blood rushing in my ears as I stared at the envelope lying beside my father's plate. Thick, cream-colored, my name was not on it. We were seated for what my mother had called a family dinner. She said it with that careful voice she used when something was already decided, and my role was simply to show up, smile, and not ask questions. Thanksgiving had passed. Christmas was coming. Snow pressed against the tall windows of their house, the one with the heated driveway, and the roses that bloomed even when the air cut your lungs. My brother Evan sat across from me, relaxed, confident, his cufflinks catching the warm light. He had always dressed like this for dinners at home, like a guest of honor, instead of a son who never called unless he needed something. I wore a simple navy sweater, sleeves pushed up, faint traces of flour still under my nails from the afternoon rush at my restaurant. I had come straight from work, again. My father cleared his throat. He always did that when he wanted silence without asking for it. "We've been thinking about the future," he said. My mother nodded, fingers wrapped around her wine glass. "And about legacy." Legacy, that word, it landed heavy. Evan smiled politely, like he already knew where this was going but was pretending not to. I felt a flicker of hope anyway. Some stubborn, foolish part of me still believed fairness might exist in this house. My father slid the envelope toward Evan. Inside, as it turned out, were documents transferring ownership of a waterfront mansion in Connecticut, along with investment statements and a verbal addition delivered casually as if they were discussing the weather. $6 million. $6 million. Not written, spoken, like it was nothing. "For stability," my mother said, "for your family." Evan reached for my father's hand. I don't know what to say. I knew what I couldn't say. I couldn't ask why. I couldn't ask how. I couldn't ask what about me. I waited. I actually waited. I sat there with my spine straight and my napkin folded neatly on my lap, waiting for the moment someone would turn to me and say, "Of course we haven't forgotten you." No one did. Instead, my father turned his attention to me with a different look, calculating, assessing. "And as for you," he said, "we wanted to talk business." That word again, not daughter, not future, business. "You've done well with your little restaurant," my mother said. Little. Impressive, considering. Considering what she didn't say, she never did. "We think it's time," my father continued, "for you to share that success with the family." I blinked. Once, twice? "Share," I repeated. "Equity," Evan added smoothly, leaning back in his chair. "It makes sense. We're family." Family. That word felt different in his mouth. They wanted a portion of my restaurant group, the one I had built from nothing, the one I had opened with loans I signed, alone nights I slept on an office couch, holidays I missed. The one they had dismissed as a phase until it started making real money. "We supported you emotionally," my mother said quickly, as if reading from a script. "This is just balance." Balance. $6 million on one side, my labor on the other. I felt something shift inside me then. Not anger yet. Something colder, like a door closing quietly. "I need time to think," I said. My father's jaw tightened. "This isn't really a request." There it was. I nodded. I smiled. I folded my napkin and placed it on the table with care. I told them I had an early morning, that the kitchen needed me, that I was tired. None of them tried to stop me. Outside, the cold slapped my face awake. I sat in my car for a long time, hands gripping the steering wheel, watching the lights glow behind those perfect windows. The house I had grown up in. The house where I learned early that love was conditional and approval was earned through obedience, not effort. I thought about the birthdays they forgot, the college graduation they skipped because Evan had a work thing, the way my grandmother used to squeeze my hand under the table and whisper, "You see more than they think." She had been gone 3 years now, gone before she could tell me whatever she'd been holding back. As I drove away, my phone buzzed, a message from Evan. "We should talk soon. Family should stick together." I didn't reply. That night, lying awake in my small but carefully chosen apartment, I replayed the dinner over and over. Every glance, every pause, every word they didn't say. By morning, the shock had settled into clarity. They hadn't excluded me by accident. They had made a choice. And for the first time in my life, I understood something with painful certainty. If I didn't protect myself now, they would take everything I had built and still call it love. What I didn't know yet was that the documents my father had slid across the table weren't the only papers being prepared that week. And the will they thought secured their legacy was about to open a door they had spent decades trying to keep locked. I didn't tell anyone what happened at that dinner. Not my staff, not my friends, not even the therapist I paid a small fortune to listen to me untangle my childhood once a week. Some things feel too raw to put into words right away, like touching a bruise to prove it exists. The next morning, I stood in the back office of my flagship restaurant, staring at the schedule board. The hum of refrigerators seeped through the walls. The smell of bread baking drifted in from the kitchen. This place had a pulse. It breathed. It depended on me in a way my family never had. I was 29 years old. That fact mattered more than ever now. Young enough for them to dismiss my authority. Old enough to have learned that nothing is given without a price. By noon, Evan called. I let it ring. He called again during the lunch rush, then again just before closing. Each time I watched the screen light up and fade, feeling a strange calm settle in my chest. Silence had always been my armor. They mistook it for weakness. That night, I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving and sat on the floor of my apartment with stacks of old boxes pulled from the closet. Things I'd never bothered to unpack after my last move. College papers, photos, letters, receipts. The debris of a life lived on the edges of a family that never quite claimed me. At the bottom of one box, wrapped in yellowing tissue paper, I found a leather folder. My grandmother's handwriting curled across the front. My name. I hadn't seen it since her funeral. I remembered her pressing it into my hands weeks before she died, her fingers trembling, her eyes sharp despite the morphine. "Don't open this yet," she had whispered. "Not until you need the truth." At the time, I thought she meant memories, stories, some sentimental keepsake. I hadn't expected legal documents. Inside were copies of deeds, old correspondence, a trust amendment dated years ago, and a letter addressed to me sealed but unmistakably deliberate. My heart thudded as I opened it. She wrote plainly, no poetry, no drama, just facts. She explained how the original family business, the one my parents now claimed as their legacy, had been built on money she inherited from her own mother. Money she had legally protected. Money that, according to her, was never meant to be divided equally between her son and her grandchildren. "They will tell you this was their work," she wrote. "They will tell you you owe them. That is not the truth." I read the letter 3 times before it sank in. There was more. A clause my parents had quietly ignored. A condition tied to behavior, not blood. One they had already violated years ago. I felt dizzy, not from excitement, from the sudden understanding that my exclusion wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. They were hiding something. The next day, my mother showed up at the restaurant. She didn't call ahead. She never did. She walked in like she owned the place, heels clicking sharply against the floor, eyes scanning the room with thinly veiled judgment. My staff stiffened. They'd seen her once before. They knew that look. We sat in my office. She declined coffee. "This doesn't need to be difficult," she said, folding her hands. "Your father was disappointed you left so abruptly." I watched her closely. The careful posture, the rehearsed calm, the way she avoided my eyes when she mentioned money. "You want my business," I said flatly. "We want unity," she replied. "This obsession with independence, it isn't healthy." There it was again, independence framed as illness. "I built this," I said, "without help." Her smile tightened. "That's not entirely true. We gave you your education." "You gave Evan more," I said before I could stop myself. The silence stretched. "You've always been sensitive," she said softly. "Your brother needs support. He carries responsibility." I thought of the mansion, the millions, the way he'd leaned back in his chair while they spoke about my labor like a communal asset. "I need time," I repeated. Her tone shifted, sharper now. "Time won't change reality." After she left, I locked my office door and sat very still. That evening, I made an appointment with a lawyer I'd been referred to months earlier but never called. Her name was Rachel Levin. She specialized in family business disputes and inheritance litigation. Her voice was steady on the phone, curious but not prying. "Bring everything," she said. I did. She read in silence, occasionally raising an eyebrow, occasionally making notes. When she finished my grandmother's letter, she leaned back in her chair and exhaled. "They don't know you have this," she said. "No," I replied. "They're assuming compliance." "Yes." She nodded slowly. "That assumption is their weakness." For the first time since the dinner, I smiled. Not wide, not soft, just enough to feel my face remember how. "What do you want?" she asked. I thought about the years of being overlooked, the quiet sacrifices, the dinner table where my worth had been measured and found expendable. "I want them to stop taking," I said, "and I want the truth to matter." She closed the folder, then we proceed carefully. As I left her office, my phone buzzed again. Evan this time with a voicemail. "You're making things awkward," he said. "Mom's upset. Don't do this the hard way." I deleted it. That night, I opened my laptop and began organizing documents. Timelines, dates, names, patterns. I wasn't planning revenge yet. I was preparing for revelation, and somewhere deep inside I felt my grandmother's voice again, calm and certain. "They will underestimate you. Let them." The first thing Rachel taught me was how to slow down. "People who believe they're in control rush," she said. "People who are actually in control wait." So I waited. I went back to my routine as if nothing had changed. I showed up at the restaurant before sunrise, checked inventory, tasted sauces, walked the floor during lunch. I laughed with my staff. I approved budgets. I signed payroll. On the surface, my life looked exactly the same. Underneath, everything had shifted. I stopped answering my parents' calls altogether. Not out of spite, out of strategy. Silence makes insecure people talk. And my family was nothing if not insecure when they weren't being obeyed. It worked faster than I expected. Within a week, Evan showed up unannounced. I saw his reflection in the glass of the front door before I heard his voice. He wore a tailored coat, and that familiar expression of mild concern, like he was visiting a sick relative, not the sister he'd helped corner at a dinner table. "Can we talk?" he asked, already stepping inside. I led him to the office, closed the door. "You're putting Mom in a bad position," he said, crossing his arms. "Dad's stressed." I sat across from him, hands folded, mirroring his posture. Years of watching them had taught me how to do this. "You got a mansion," I said calmly. "And $6 million. His jaw tightened for just a fraction of a second. "Enough. That's not the point." "It's the entire point," I replied. He sighed, shaking his head. "You always do this. Make things emotional." I leaned forward. "You want my company, say it." He hesitated, then nodded. "We want to share. For protection." "For who?" "For the family." There it was again. That word stretched thin and hollow. "You didn't need protection when I was paying interest rates." "You couldn't pronounce," I said. "You didn't need unity when I was working holidays and you were posting vacation photos." He bristled. That was different. "Everything is different," I said, "when it's mine." He stood. "You're going to regret pushing back." I didn't respond. He left without saying goodbye. 2 days later, my father called Rachel. He didn't know who she was. He thought she was my accountant. He talked, too much. Rachel recorded notes meticulously. The assumptions, the threats disguised as concern, the casual admissions that they believed my business was family property by moral right if not legal one. "That call was a gift," she told me later. "They think you're isolated." I wasn't. That same week, an envelope arrived at my apartment. No return address. Inside was a photocopy of a document I'd never seen before. A codicil to my grandmother's will. Unsigned. Drafted but never executed. I read it twice, heart racing. It outlined a transfer of controlling interest in a holding company I didn't know existed. A company that owned several properties now under my parents' control. And it named me. Not outright. Conditionally. Subject to review of conduct. The implication was clear. She had intended to change everything. But she had died before it was finalized. Or so they thought. I brought it to Rachel immediately. "This changes leverage," she said. "Not outcome yet, but leverage. Can we use it?" "We can ask why it exists," she replied. "And who stopped it?" The question hung between us. Who had stopped it? The answer came sooner than expected. My Aunt Lydia called me for the first time in years. My mother's sister. The one who always looked uncomfortable at family gatherings, like she was witnessing something she couldn't unsee. "I heard things are tense," she said carefully. "That's one word for it," I replied. There was a pause. Then quietly, "Your grandmother didn't trust your parents." I closed my eyes. She told me once, Lydia continued, that if anything happened to her before things were set right, you'd need help. Help! That word felt dangerous and necessary all at once. We met for coffee the next morning. She brought documents, originals, not copies. The signed version of the codicil. My grandmother's signature was unmistakable, strong, defiant. It had been witnessed, notarized, and filed, but not where my parents had looked. Rachel's hands trembled as she reviewed it. "This is real," she said, "and it's devastating. Devastating to them, To me, it felt like oxygen. But Rachel cautioned me, "This won't be quick. They will fight, and they will get ugly." I thought of my mother's smile, my father's tone, Evan's entitlement. "Let them," I said. That night I dreamed of my grandmother sitting at the head of the table watching as the lights dimmed and the truth came into view. When I woke, there was a message from my father. "We need to resolve this before it goes too far." I smiled to myself. It already had. The first formal move didn't come from my parents. It came from their lawyer. A thick envelope arrived at my apartment on a gray Tuesday morning, slipped halfway under the door, like something that didn't want to be seen. The letterhead was familiar. Old Family Counsel. The same firm that had handled every will trust and corporate shuffle since before I was born. Rachel smiled when she read it. "They're bluffing," she said. "But it's an aggressive bluff." The letter accused me of breaching an implied fiduciary duty to the family by refusing to share proprietary business information. It suggested mediation. It implied consequences. It said nothing very carefully about the will. That omission told us everything. "They don't know," I said. "Not yet," Rachel replied, "but they're circling." The next few weeks felt like living in two parallel worlds. In one, I was still the daughter they assumed they could pressure. The quiet one. The reasonable one. The one who would eventually cave because that's what I had always done. In the other, I was a business owner quietly locking doors they didn't realize were open. Rachel helped me restructure parts of my company. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, just prudent. We separated intellectual property, clarified ownership, documented loans. We cleaned everything. Every dollar accounted for, every signature dated. Meanwhile, my parents escalated. My mother began leaving voicemails late at night. Not angry, wounded. "I don't recognize you anymore," she said in one. "This isn't how we raised you," she said in another. My father tried a different angle. He sent emails with subject lines like "Family Matters" and "Time is Running." He copied Evan. He copied my Aunt Lydia once, then removed her the next time. Evan sent nothing. Silence from him meant calculation. The real shift came at Sunday dinner. They invited me, formally. A text from my mother, overly polite, like a stranger asking for a favor. "We would like to clear the air." Rachel advised against going. I went anyway, not to argue, to observe. The table was set like a stage. Candles, linen napkins. My father's posture rigid, my mother composed. Evan seated at his usual place, one arm draped casually over the chair beside him, as if daring someone to challenge his claim to space. They talked around the issue for 20 minutes. The weather, the market, Evan's upcoming travel. My restaurant expansion mentioned vaguely without congratulations. Then my father leaned forward. "We need to talk about your attitude," he said. There it was. "You're treating this like a transaction," my mother added. "This is about family." I looked at each of them in turn, not defensively, just clearly. "Then explain the difference," I said, "between $6 million and nothing." Evan scoffed. "You're obsessed with that number." "No," I replied. "I'm focused on meaning." My father's voice hardened. "You are jeopardizing relationships that matter." To who, I asked. The silence that followed answered me. Then Evan spoke. "Let's be practical. Sign over a minority share. We all move on." I smiled then, truly smiled. "No," I said. My mother inhaled sharply. "You don't understand the consequences." I stood. "I understand them perfectly." As I reached for my coat, my father said, "Your grandmother would be ashamed." I stopped, turned. "She knew exactly who you were," I said quietly. "That's why she protected me." The color drained from my mother's face. Evan's eyes narrowed. My father froze. I left before any of them could speak. That night, Rachel called me, voice tight with urgency. "They filed a petition this afternoon," she said, "to compel disclosure of your business records. It's weak, but it forces our next move." "Which is?" "We respond," she said, "and then we counter." The counter was simple. We filed notice of intent to challenge the estate's current administration. We attached nothing, just enough to signal danger. Within 48 hours, my father requested a private meeting. Not at home, at his office. Rachel came with me. He looked smaller there, less certain. His authority diluted by glass walls and fluorescent lighting. "This is unnecessary," he said. "We can still resolve this quietly." "Quietly benefits you," Rachel replied. He ignored her. Looked at me instead. "You've always been intelligent. Don't let resentment ruin that." I thought of my grandmother's letter. Of nights I worked alone. Of dinners like the last one where love was measured in assets. "I'm not resentful," I said. "I'm informed." He leaned back. "What do you want?" I met his gaze, the truth, on record. For the first time, he looked afraid, because the truth once spoken could not be managed, and the house of silence they had built was already starting to crack. The truth, once you ask for it, doesn't arrive gently. It comes like a draft through a house that's been sealed too long, rattling doors people swore were locked. My father didn't give me answers that day. He gave me delays. I need to review documents, he said. There are complexities you wouldn't understand. That old line. I'd heard it my entire life, always delivered with the same patient condescension, like he was explaining gravity to a child. Rachel didn't push. She didn't need to. Silence after a demand is often louder than refusal. 3 days later, the petition my parents filed was quietly amended, narrowed, weakened. It was a retreat disguised as refinement. They're scared, Rachel said, but not cornered yet. I felt it too. A tension in the air like before a storm breaks. My mother stopped calling. Evan reappeared this time through mutual acquaintances, planting soft questions. Had I been sleeping? Was I overwhelmed? Did I need help managing stress? Concern as surveillance. Then the first real blow landed. A longtime supplier called me early one morning, voice hesitant. He said my father had reached out, said there were concerns about my company's stability, suggested caution. I hung up slowly. That was the moment my sadness turned into something else entirely. Because this wasn't just family drama anymore, this was sabotage. Rachel was calm when I told her. Calm in the way people get when a line has been crossed and clarity follows. Now we document, she said. Every call, every interference, every attempt to undermine your business. What if they succeed? I asked. It was the first time I admitted the fear aloud. They won't, she said. Because they're acting emotionally. And you're not. But I was still human. That night alone in my apartment, I let myself feel it. The betrayal layered on betrayal. The realization that they would rather damage my livelihood than admit they were wrong. I thought of Christmas mornings when Evan's gifts spilled across the living room, while mine fit neatly into a single box. Of applause that never came, of praise rationed like medicine. By morning I was steady again. Rachel filed a motion alleging interference with business relations, carefully worded, supported by affidavits. We didn't accuse, we implied. In law, implication can be devastating. That same afternoon, my Aunt Lydia called again. They're unraveling, she said quietly. Your mother hasn't slept. Your father keeps rewriting history. Did they know about the codicil, I asked? Lydia hesitated. Your mother did, before your grandmother died. My breath caught. She pressured her. Lydia continued, said it would tear the family apart, said you were too young, too independent, too unpredictable. To me. Did she destroy it, I asked. No, Lydia said. She hid it, and convinced your father it never existed. That explained the fear, the sudden caution, the look on my mother's face when I mentioned my grandmother at dinner. Rachel was quiet when I told her. Then she nodded once. That makes motive clear, she said, which matters more than you think. The next confrontation came unexpectedly. I was closing the restaurant when Evan walked in alone this time. No smile, no pretense. We need to stop, he said. I locked the door behind him. You came to my place of business again. I needed to see you, he replied, without lawyers. I crossed my arms. Talk. He paced. You're forcing them into a corner. Dad's health isn't great. There it was, guilt sharpened and aimed. You didn't worry about his health when you took the money, I said. That was different. It always is. He stopped pacing. Looked at me, really looked like he was seeing a stranger. You're not going to win, he said quietly. I met his gaze. I already have. He laughed, but it was hollow. You think this ends with you getting something? No, I said. It ends with you losing the ability to take. That was when he said it, the thing he hadn't meant to. You were never supposed to know, he muttered. I stepped closer. Know what? He froze. For a moment I thought he might backtrack. But years of entitlement have a way of loosening tongues. The condition, he said, in Grandma's will. My pulse thundered. What condition? He swallowed. Behavior. Transparency. Fair treatment of all grandchildren. I said nothing. They violated it years ago, he continued, voice low. When they funneled assets. When they cut you out of discussions. And you knew, I said. He looked away. That was all I needed. Rachel moved fast after that. We filed to compel discovery, full accounting, decades deep. The judge granted it. My parents didn't cry then. They didn't rage. They panicked. Boxes were delivered. Records requested. Statements examined. Patterns revealed. What emerged wasn't just favoritism. It was systematic exclusion. Money diverted, Assets reclassified, promises broken. And at the center of it all, a grandmother who had seen it coming and tried to stop it. The night before our first hearing, I stood alone in the restaurant, lights dimmed, chairs stacked. I placed my hand on the counter, feeling the smooth wood worn by years of work. This was mine, and no matter what happened next, I would not let them take it. Not anymore. Courtrooms are colder than people expect. Not just the temperature, but the way silence settles there, heavy and watchful. I sat beside Rachel at the long table, hands folded, spine straight, reminding myself to breathe. Across from us, my parents sat with their lawyer. Evan was there too, a few seats behind them, like an accessory they hadn't decided how to use. This was the first hearing. Procedural, Rachel had said. No fireworks. She was wrong. The judge was a woman in her early 60s, silver hair pulled back tightly, eyes sharp with the kind of patience that comes from having seen every version of human dishonesty. She listened. She asked questions. She didn't interrupt, but when she spoke, everyone leaned forward. My parents' attorney framed the case as concern. A worried family, a daughter being influenced, a business owner overwhelmed by sudden success. Rachel responded with timelines, numbers, patterns, calm, methodical truth. Then the judge asked for clarification. Why, she said, looking directly at my father, was this codicil not disclosed during the initial probate process? My father cleared his throat. That old habit again. To our knowledge, it was never finalized. Rachel stood. Your Honor, we have a notarized, witnessed, and filed document indicating otherwise. She handed it up. The judge read, slowly. The room held its breath. When she looked up, her gaze shifted from my father to my mother. And you were aware of this amendment, she asked. My mother's lips parted, closed, parted again. I don't recall, she said. The judge nodded once. Memory can be selective. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, recognition. After the hearing, Evan caught up to me in the hallway. This is spiraling, he said. You're humiliating them. You did that yourselves, I replied. He shook his head. You don't understand what you're triggering. I paused, then explain it. He didn't. He walked away. The next weeks were brutal. Discovery uncovered more than Rachel and I had anticipated. Shell entities, interfamily loans forgiven quietly, assets transferred under the guise of management fees, and always consistently my exclusion. Rachel worked late nights. So did I. I balanced expansion meetings with legal strategy, supplier reassurance with deposition prep. Some days I felt split in two. Other days I felt sharper than ever. Then the press got hold of it. Not my story, theirs. A short article appeared in a regional business journal. Nothing sensational. Just a mention of an inheritance dispute involving a prominent local family and allegations of mismanagement. My mother called me the moment it went live. Her voice cracked. You wanted this public. You made it public when you took what wasn't yours, I said. She sobbed then, real sobs. For a moment I almost wavered. Then she said, you're tearing your father apart. I hung up. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing her face contorted with grief and wondering where that grief had been when I needed protection, when I needed fairness, when I needed acknowledgement. The answer was always the same. Absent. Rachel called me early the next morning. They're offering mediation, she said. What changed? They're scared of testimony, she replied. Specifically yours. I laughed softly. They should be. Mediation was scheduled for the following week. Neutral office, neutral facilitator. Neutral everything. Nothing about it felt neutral. My father spoke first. Carefully. Measured. He admitted mistakes. Framed them as misunderstandings. Expressed regret without naming actions. My mother cried again. Said she had always wanted harmony. That she never meant to hurt me. Evan stayed silent. When it was my turn, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I told my story. I talked about being left out of decisions. About watching resources flow one direction. About being told my success was luck while his was destiny. About the dinner where everything became undeniable. Then I slid one document across the table. A summary Rachel had prepared, clear, undeniable. I don't want your money, I said. I want acknowledgement. And I want what was intentionally withheld, restored according to the terms my grandmother set. The mediator looked stunned. My father's hands shook. My mother whispered, this wasn't supposed to happen. That was when Evan finally spoke. She planned it, he said. Grandma, she saw what you were doing. Everyone turned to him. She told me once, he continued, that if you didn't stop favoring me, she would make sure you paid for it. My father stared at him like he'd been struck. You knew, my mother asked. Evan looked down. I thought she was bluffing. Silence swallowed the room. The mediation ended without agreement. But something else ended too. The illusion. Weeks later, the judge issued an interim ruling. Administration of the contested assets was suspended. An independent trustee was appointed. My parents lost control overnight. I sat alone in my apartment when Rachel called with the news. I didn't cheer, I didn't cry. I felt steady, like someone who had finally stepped onto solid ground after years of shifting floors. There was still a long way to go. Appeals, final rulings, consequences. But the balance had shifted. And for the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was leading. The night before the next hearing, Evan sent me a message. "I don't know who we are without this." I stared at it for a long time. Then I replied, "You're about to find out. Power doesn't disappear quietly. When people lose it, they reach for whatever is left, even if it burns them." The weeks after the interim ruling were the most unstable of my life. Not outwardly. Outwardly, things looked almost calm. The restaurant expansion moved forward. Investors stayed confident. The independent trustee froze the contested accounts, which meant my parents couldn't touch anything new, but nothing had yet been returned to me either. Everything was suspended in midair. Emotionally, though, the ground kept shifting. My mother stopped calling altogether. That silence was different from before. It wasn't strategic. It was wounded pride. My father, on the other hand, began sending long emails, pages of explanation, history rewritten line by line. He spoke of pressure of protecting the family name, of difficult choices made in complicated times. He never once wrote the words "I'm sorry." Evan tried a new approach. He showed up at my apartment one evening without warning. I didn't invite him in. We stood in the hallway, the overhead light flickering faintly like it couldn't decide whose side it was on. "You've changed," he said. "I grew up," I replied. He exhaled sharply. "You think this is justice, but you're breaking something you can't fix." I studied his face. The confidence was gone now. In its place was fear, naked and unfamiliar. "What exactly am I breaking?" I asked. He hesitated. "The way things were." I almost laughed. "The way things were only worked for you," I said. "That's not a system. That's theft dressed up as tradition." He leaned against the wall. "Do you know what happens if the court rules fully against them?" "Yes," I said. "They face consequences." He shook his head. "No, they lose everything: reputation, control, the life they built." "The life they built on exclusion," I said. He looked at me, then really looked, and something shifted in his expression, something like realization. "You don't need to destroy them," he said quietly. "You already proved your point." That was the closest he'd come to asking for mercy. "I'm not destroying anyone," I said. "I'm refusing to be erased." He left without another word. That night, I dreamed of the dining table again. But this time, the chairs were empty. The chandelier hummed louder and louder until it shattered glass raining down, and no one moved to clean it up. The next morning, Rachel called with urgency in her voice. "They're preparing a counteroffensive," she said. "Not legally, personally." Within days, whispers started circulating. Subtle ones at first. A comment from an old family friend. A question from a distant cousin. Had I always been so difficult? Was I being manipulated? Was stress affecting my judgment? They were trying to isolate me. Rachel warned me this might happen. Character attacks often follow financial ones. It's easier to dismiss a woman as unstable than to admit she was right. I prepared anyway. I reached out to people I trusted, longtime vendors, former employees, mentors, not to complain, just to reconnect, to remind myself who I was outside the story my family was trying to tell. Then something unexpected happened. One of my mother's friends contacted me, a woman who had known our family for decades, who had watched me grow up quietly in the background. "I'm proud of you," she said. The words stunned me. "She was always afraid of your grandmother," the woman continued. "Afraid of what she saw." That sentence stayed with me. The fear hadn't been of chaos, it had been of exposure. The next hearing loomed. This one mattered. Testimony would be taken, lines drawn, decisions shaped. Rachel and I prepared obsessively. Every document, every date, every conversation reconstructed. I practiced answering questions calmly without emotion. Not because I felt none, but because I had learned how easily emotion could be used against me. The night before the hearing, I received an email from my father. It was short. "If you proceed tomorrow, there is no coming back." I didn't reply. In court, when I took the stand, I didn't look at them at first. I focused on the judge, on Rachel's steady presence beside me, on my breath. I answered every question truthfully. Yes, I was excluded from financial discussions. Yes, assets were transferred without my knowledge. Yes, I had been pressured to share my business under threat of familial estrangement. When asked how it made me feel, I paused. I felt invisible, I said, and then I felt awake. There was a murmur in the courtroom. Then my mother's attorney asked the question he thought would weaken me. Isn't it true, he said, that you're motivated by revenge? I looked at him, then at the judge. No, I said. I'm motivated by dignity. Silence followed, the kind that settles heavy and final. When I stepped down, my legs trembled, but my voice hadn't. During a recess, Evan passed me in the hallway. His eyes were red. I didn't think it would go this far, he said. It went this far a long time ago, I replied. I just stopped pretending it hadn't. The judge recessed for the day without ruling. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. I stood on the courthouse steps, breathing deeply, feeling something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not victory, certainty. Whatever happened next, the truth was no longer just mine to carry. And the family narrative they'd controlled for decades was finally out of their hands. The waiting is what wears you down. Not the shouting, not the accusations, not even the betrayals. It's the space between moments where your mind fills in worst-case endings before reality has a chance to speak. The judge took 2 weeks to issue the next ruling. 2 weeks of waking up before dawn, checking my phone, forcing myself to eat, reminding myself that no news was not bad news. 2 weeks of my parents staying completely silent, which felt more ominous than their threats ever had. Evan broke first. He asked to meet. Not at my apartment, not at the restaurant. A neutral place, a quiet cafe on the edge of town where no one knew our names. I almost didn't go. But curiosity has its own gravity. He looked older when I arrived, not just tired, smaller somehow, like the air had gone out of him. He didn't stand when I approached, just nodded. I don't have much time, I said, sitting anyway. I know, he replied, neither do I. He stared into his coffee for a long moment, then spoke. They're selling the Connecticut house. I felt a flicker of surprise, quickly smothered. Already. They need liquidity, he said. Legal fees, contingencies. And the $6 million I asked? He winced, mostly frozen. What's left is complicated. I watched his face carefully. There was no triumph there, no arrogance, just the quiet panic of someone realizing the safety net was never permanent. They blame you, he said finally. I know. But they're wrong, he added. That made me look up. He swallowed. I was always the favorite. We both know that. But I didn't see how deliberate it was. Not until now. I waited, letting him fill the silence. They assumed you'd accept it, he continued. That you'd stay grateful. Invisible. When you didn't, it scared them. It should have, I said. He nodded. I don't think they ever believed you'd fight. There it was. The truth beneath everything. I didn't believe it either, I admitted. We sat in silence again. The cafe hummed softly around us, strangers living lives untouched by this quiet implosion. What do you want? He asked. The question felt different this time. Less demanding, almost genuine. I want to finish this, I said. And then I want distance. He exhaled. They're going to ask me to testify against you. I didn't flinch. Will you? He closed his eyes. When he opened them, there were tears there. No, he said. I won't. I studied him. The boy who'd always been chosen first. The man who'd never learned what it cost. Why, I asked. Because for the first time he said, I see what they did to you. And to me. I stood. That's your choice to live with. As I left, he called after me. If the judge rules in your favor, what happens to them? I paused. They face what they avoided, I said, accountability. That night Rachel called. Her voice was calm, but I recognized the undercurrent of momentum. We have the draft ruling, she said. Not final yet, but it's leaning our way. My heart pounded. How far? Full forensic accounting, she replied. Retroactive correction of asset transfers and potential surcharge against the administrators. Against my parents. I sat down slowly. And the codicil, I asked. Upheld, she said. Provisionally, which means the court recognizes your grandmother's intent. Tears blurred my vision, unexpected and sharp. This isn't over, Rachel cautioned. They can appeal. They will appeal. I know, I said. But something had changed. The fear that had lived in my chest for months had begun to loosen its grip. The next blow came from an unexpected direction. A reporter reached out. Not gossip media. A long-form journalist known for deep dives into power dynamics and inheritance disputes. I'm not interested in scandal, she said. I'm interested in systems. I almost said no. Then I thought about how many women my age and older had lived this story quietly, had been erased politely, had been told to be grateful for crumbs. We met. I didn't name names. I didn't dramatize. I spoke plainly. About favoritism. About silence. About how easily control hides behind the word family. The article ran a week later. It didn't attack my parents. It didn't praise me. It asked uncomfortable questions. The response was immediate. Emails. Messages. Women I'd never met telling me versions of my own life. Sisters excluded. Daughters overlooked. Businesses taken. Inheritances weaponized. I realized then that this was bigger than revenge. This was about visibility. The judge issued the ruling on a Friday afternoon. Rachel called me as soon as it was released. They lost, she said, on every major point. I closed my eyes. The court found deliberate mismanagement, she continued. Violation of fiduciary duty, intentional concealment. My parents were ordered to step down permanently from all administrative roles. Assets were to be reallocated according to my grandmother's intent, including restitution. It wasn't $6 million. It was more, because time, it turns out, has a way of compounding injustice. I didn't celebrate. I sat alone in my apartment, lights off city, glowing faintly outside the windows. I thought about the girl I used to be, the woman I had become, the cost of standing up and the cost of staying silent. My phone buzzed, a message from my mother. I don't know how to live with this. I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed a reply. Neither did I, but I learned. I set the phone down and let the quiet settle. There would be appeals, fallout, consequences I couldn't yet see, but the balance had turned. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting for permission to exist. Winning in court doesn't feel the way people imagine it does. There's no rush of triumph, no sudden peace. What comes instead is exposure. The lights turn on and you see everything clearly, including the damage. The appeal was filed exactly 9 days later. Rachel wasn't surprised. This is about pride now, she said, not law. The appeal slowed everything, but changed nothing fundamental. The findings stood. The accounting continued. Assets remained frozen. My parents' authority was gone, even if they refused to accept it. That refusal took strange forms. My father sent a letter, handwritten, pages of it. He spoke about sacrifice, about how much pressure he'd carried as a provider. He framed his actions as protection, his deception as necessity. He never mentioned my grandmother by name. My mother took a different route. She called me one afternoon, her voice eerily calm. I hope you understand, she said, that your actions have consequences. I do, I replied. You've damaged your brother, she continued. He's lost standing, opportunities. I thought of Evan sitting in that cafe, hands wrapped around a cup he didn't want. He built his standing on favoritism, I said, not merit. Her breath caught. You always had a cruel streak. I laughed softly. You just never noticed until it affected you. She hung up. That night, Evan came to my restaurant. He sat alone at the bar, untouched drink in front of him. When I finished closing tasks, I joined him. They're not okay, he said. I know. They don't eat, he continued. They barely leave the house. I watched the reflection of lights in the polished bar surface. That's not my responsibility. He nodded. I know, I don't know where I fit anymore. That was the truth beneath his fear. Without the pedestal they'd built for him, he didn't know who he was. You fit wherever you choose to stand, honestly, I said. He looked at me, eyes tired. I wish I'd seen it sooner. So do I replied. The trustee completed the forensic accounting before the appeal hearing. The numbers were worse than expected. Money moved in patterns too deliberate to be accidental. Benefits flowing consistently to Evan. Costs absorbed quietly by everyone else. Rachel prepared a supplemental filing. This increases exposure, she said. If the appeal fails, there may be personal liability. For the first time, I felt a twinge of something like pity. It passed. The appeal hearing was brief. The appellate judge was younger, brisk, unimpressed with emotional arguments. My parents' attorney leaned heavily on family unity, on tradition, on intent. Rachel leaned on evidence. The appeal was denied. Just like that. Final. The fallout was immediate. The mansion sale finalized at a loss. Public enough to sting. Private enough to wound. Longtime acquaintances stopped calling. Invitations dried up. The family name, once a shield, became a liability. And then came the thing I hadn't anticipated. Relief. Not just for me, for others. My Aunt Lydia called one evening, her voice lighter than I'd ever heard it. Do you know how long I've waited for this? She asked. For what? For someone to say no. She told me stories then, about money she'd been asked to funnel, about favors expected, about silence rewarded. They ruled by exhaustion, she said. You outlasted them. I didn't correct her. The restitution process took months. Assets were transferred, accounts settled, ownership rebalanced. I didn't take everything I was entitled to. Rachel advised against overreach. The court noticed. That restraint mattered, the journalist followed up. A second piece ran. This one about outcomes, about how systems resist change until someone refuses to comply quietly. My parents withdrew from public life. Evan changed jobs. Smaller firm, less prestige, more accountability. He called me once months later to tell me he'd started therapy. I'm learning what responsibility actually means, he said. That's good, I replied, and I meant it. As for me, I expanded carefully, thoughtfully. I invested in people who had invested in me. I built mentorship programs, quietly supported women navigating similar family entanglements. I didn't call it revenge. I called it repair. One evening, long after the case had closed, I visited my grandmother's grave. I brought no flowers, just myself. I did what you tried to do, I said aloud. I didn't stay quiet. The wind stirred the leaves. For the first time, I felt like the story had reached its natural pause. Not an ending, just a place to breathe. But stories like this don't end cleanly. They echo. And the final echo was still coming. I thought the worst was behind us. That was my mistake. Revenge doesn't always come as a counterattack. Sometimes it comes disguised as remorse. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning subject line, simple and misleading family. It was from my father. I almost deleted it without opening. Almost. But something in the timing felt deliberate, like a chess move made when you think the board is settled. He wrote that he was ill. Not dramatically, not begging, just a statement woven into paragraphs about reflection and regret. He said the stress of the past year had taken a toll, that doctors were concerned, that he wanted to see me. Rachel warned me immediately. This could be a manipulation. I know, I said. But it might also be real, she added. And either way, you need boundaries. I agreed to meet him. Not alone. Not at home. A public place. A quiet restaurant near the river where the tables were spaced wide and the light softened everything. He arrived early. He looked thinner, grayer, not frail but diminished. The man who had once filled rooms now seemed unsure how to occupy a chair. Thank you for coming, he said. I nodded. You said you wanted to talk. He folded his hands just like he always had when preparing to control a conversation. But this time they trembled. I misjudged you, he said. I waited. I thought you would break, he continued, that you'd fold like your mother always did. There it was, the truth stripped of politeness. And when you didn't, he went on, I panicked. Panicked enough to try to ruin my business, I said calmly. He flinched. I was trying to reassert order. Order that served you, I replied. He sighed, yes. The admission hung between us fragile and heavy. I'm sick, he said again, and I don't want to leave things like this. What does like this mean, I asked. He hesitated, unresolved. I thought of the appeal, the losses, the humiliation, the letters, the silence. Resolution doesn't come from regret, I said. It comes from repair. He nodded slowly. What would repair look like to you? The question surprised me. Truth, I said, publicly acknowledged, not managed, not softened. His jaw tightened. That would destroy what's left. I met his eyes. Then there's nothing to discuss. He leaned back, defeated. You really won't bend. No, I said, I won't. We sat in silence for a while. The river moved beside us, indifferent to human drama. Finally, he spoke again. Your mother can't handle this. She's unraveling. I can't carry her guilt, I said. He nodded like he'd expected that answer. As we stood to leave, he reached for my hand. I let him briefly. I underestimated you, he said. I know, I replied. You always did. That night, my mother showed up at my apartment. She hadn't been invited. She never asked permission. She rang the bell until my neighbors started to notice. When I opened the door, she looked smaller than I remembered. Not in stature, in certainty. You met him, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Sat, looked around. You're comfortable, she said, independent. I worked for it, I replied. She pressed her lips together. He's trying to make peace. He's trying to regain control, I said. Her eyes filled with tears. Do you enjoy this, watching us fall? I felt something in my chest tighten, not guilt, resolve. No, I said. I enjoy not falling with you. She stared at me, stunned. You were supposed to stay loyal, she whispered. I was loyal, I replied. To myself, when you weren't. She shook her head slowly. You've become cold. I smiled, small and sad. I've become clear. She left without another word. Weeks passed. My father's health deteriorated, or so I was told. I didn't ask for updates. I didn't send flowers. I didn't visit. Some boundaries are not punishments, they're protections. The unexpected twist came from the trustee. An irregularity had surfaced. One last asset. Hidden. A life insurance policy taken out years earlier. Beneficiary Evan. Purpose to offset losses if family stability was threatened. Rachel stared at the document. This was meant as a failsafe. For who, I asked. For him, she said. And against you. The policy's payout conditions were now under review due to misrepresentation. If voided, Evan would lose the last financial cushion he had. I thought of him at the cafe, at the bar, trying to learn responsibility without a net. Can we redirect it, I asked. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Legally, yes. If you're willing. I am, I said, but not to me. She understood immediately. We proposed reallocating the policy into a charitable trust, one that supported women navigating family-based financial abuse. My parents fought it. They lost. When Evan found out, he called me, voice shaking. You didn't have to do that, he said. I know, I replied. Why did you, he asked. Because revenge that mirrors cruelty just keeps the cycle alive, I said, and I'm done living in it. He was silent for a long time. I don't deserve this, he said finally. No, I replied, but you needed to see it. After the call ended, I sat alone in my apartment thinking about how far we'd come from that dinner table. This wasn't the ending I'd imagined when it began. It was something quieter, something harder, something truer, and there was still one chapter left to write. The weeks after the insurance decision were strangely quiet. No more filings, no more emergency calls from Rachel, no late-night emails thick with accusation or guilt. It was as if the storm had finally burned itself out, leaving behind an uneasy stillness. That silence was harder than the chaos. I kept expecting another twist, another demand, another attempt to pull me back into a role I no longer fit. But nothing came. My parents withdrew completely. Evan kept his distance. The court closed the file. Life inconveniently went on. I threw myself into work, not as an escape, but as a grounding force. The restaurant was busy. A new location was nearing completion. Staff meetings were filled with practical concerns instead of emotional residue. For the first time in months, my days were shaped by choice rather than reaction. Still, something felt unfinished. Not legally, not financially, emotionally. I realized it one morning while standing in line at a bakery near my apartment. An older woman ahead of me was laughing softly with the cashier, her hand resting easily on the counter, her posture relaxed. There was nothing remarkable about her except the ease with which she occupied space. I envied that. I had fought so hard to reclaim what was mine that I hadn't yet learned how to live without armor. The invitation came a few days later, handwritten, mailed. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. My mother. She asked me to come to the house. Not for dinner, not to talk business, just to sit with her. I stared at the card for a long time. Rachel advised against it. You owe her nothing, she said. I know, I replied, but I owe myself clarity. I went on a Sunday afternoon. The house looked the same from the outside. Immaculate, controlled, untouched by the upheaval inside it. My mother answered the door herself. No makeup, no careful styling. She looked older than I remembered. Smaller in a way that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with exhaustion. We sat in the living room. No tea, no wine. Just two women facing the truth neither had wanted to name for decades. I don't know how to be your mother anymore, she said quietly. The honesty startled me. You were never taught how, I replied. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. She nodded. I learned to survive by aligning myself with strength, with authority. I thought that was love. And I learned to disappear, I said. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. I thought if you needed less, you would hurt less. That's not how it works, I said gently. We sat in silence for a while, then she spoke again. I'm ashamed, she said. Not because of the court, because of what it took for me to see you. I believed her, and that surprised me more than anything else. I can't undo it, she continued. But I don't want to die pretending it didn't matter. There it was. Not an apology, not forgiveness. Something messier, something real. I'm not ready for a relationship, I said. She nodded. I understand. I'm not promising reconciliation, I added. I know. That was enough. When I left, I felt lighter. Not healed, but no longer carrying something that wasn't mine to hold. Evan reached out a week later, not with drama, not with guilt, just an update. He had moved, downsized, started over. He said he was learning to live without being chosen first. "I don't know who I am yet," he wrote. Neither did I fully, but that uncertainty no longer scared me. The charitable trust launched quietly. No press, no speeches, just action. The first letters came in within weeks, women telling stories that echoed mine in different keys. Mothers, daughters, sisters, some older than me. Many older than the audience I knew would hear this story one day. I read every letter. One night, sitting alone in my apartment, I realized something profound. This was never about money. Money had just been the language my family understood. What I had reclaimed was something else entirely: my voice, my boundaries, my right to exist without shrinking. The past no longer demanded explanation. It simply existed behind me, no longer steering. I slept better, laughed more easily, stopped flinching when my phone rang. And for the first time since that dinner, I stopped bracing for impact. The final chapter wasn't about revenge. It was about what comes after you choose yourself and refuse to apologize for it. And it was time to tell that part of the story. The last thing I expected after everything settled was quiet happiness. Not the loud kind, not celebration, just a steady, ordinary sense of rightness that crept into my days without asking permission. It showed up in small ways. In the mornings when I woke without dread. In the evenings when I locked the restaurant doors and felt satisfaction instead of exhaustion. In conversations where I no longer rehearsed what I was allowed to say. I was still 29, still building, still learning. But I was no longer carrying the weight of proving my worth to people who benefited from denying it. The trust grew quietly. The women it helped never used the word revenge. They used words like relief, safety, dignity. One woman in her 60s wrote that she had spent her entire adult life believing silence was the price of belonging. She thanked me for showing her it wasn't. That letter stayed on my desk for weeks. Evan and I spoke occasionally. Not often, not intimately, but honestly. He told me once that losing everything he'd been handed forced him to learn how to stand without leaning. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive them," he said. "You don't have to," I replied. "Just don't become them." My father never asked to see me again. His health declined, then stabilized. He sent one final letter months later, short, unpolished. He wrote that he understood now that control was not the same as leadership, that fear had driven him more than love. I didn't write back. Some truths don't require response. My mother and I spoke once more briefly at my Aunt Lydia's birthday. Polite, careful. She didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't offer reconciliation. What passed between us was something quieter than either. Acceptance. That was enough. On the anniversary of that dinner, I hosted my own Thanksgiving. Not a statement, not a performance, just people who had shown up for me when there was nothing to gain. Staff, friends, chosen family. We ate too much, we laughed, we argued about music, someone burned the rolls. No one counted who got more. At one point, I stepped away to the kitchen, leaned against the counter, and felt a wave of emotion catch me off guard. Not grief. Gratitude. For the version of myself who had finally said no. For the grandmother who had seen clearly when others chose blindness. For the courage it took to be labeled difficult instead of disappearing. I used to think revenge meant watching someone else fall. I know better now. Real revenge is refusing to stay small so others can stay comfortable. It's choosing dignity over approval, truth over harmony, self-respect over inheritance. If you're listening to this story and something in it feels familiar, let me say this plainly. You are not wrong for noticing the imbalance. You are not selfish for naming it. You are not cruel for protecting what you built. Silence is not virtue when it's forced. Loyalty is not love when it only flows one way. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is stop explaining herself and start documenting the truth. The tables don't turn all at once. They turn slowly, quietly, the moment you decide you will no longer hold them steady for everyone else. That dinner didn't break me. It woke me up. And everything that followed was simply the cost of refusing to go back to sleep. If this story resonated with you, if you've lived some version of it, or if you're still standing at the table wondering why your plate is empty, stay. There are more stories like this, and you're not alone.